Welcome back to another episode of the House of Hoosier podcast presented by the Field of 68 Podcast Network. I'm Ian Plaskoff, joined by Austin Platt. And Austin, it feels awfully good to be done with school, done with finals here for this first semester, but a little bit of a sour taste left with the recent performance of Indiana basketball going up against the patented Nebraska ball over in Lincoln. So, I mean, it was just a bad watch. But we'll start out on the positive note because as I think we've figured out throughout this early part of the season, I'm the more optimistic fan out of the two of us. So we'll start out with the positives. I mean, first off, Miles Rice. I mean, he was the player that played the most complete game from Indiana, and he really kept Indiana afloat in this one. And really, there isn't too much else to say of any other player but him on the positive side.
Yeah, Ian, I actually came away with more positives than I would have imagined after this game. I know that's like not who I am, but obviously the scoreboard doesn't tell the entire story. Indiana loses 85-68. It's a 17-1 run for Nebraska in the last 6.5 minutes to put the game on ice. But, 3 minutes into this game, it's 13-3. Nebraska's up, and it's like, here we go again. Like, I was like, I'm ready to turn the TV off. With 5 minutes left in the half, I'm ready to call it a night, go to bed early, and start my weekend off. Just not even thinking about IU basketball. And Indiana gave themselves a chance to win this game. And for, I think, as poor as the offense was, if they knock down a few more shots in the last 5 minutes, they have a legit chance to win this game. Honestly, with the way IU has matched up against Nebraska the past few years, especially on the road, that's all you can really ask for at this juncture. It's early in the season. I think if this game happens later on in February or March, I give Indiana a much better shot to win it. But it's the first true road game. It's the first time Indiana had played away from Assembly Hall since that trip to the Bahamas, which was a few weeks ago from when they played last Friday. So all things considered, I was happy with the way they responded. They showed some fight. They had open shots, which is good. But it felt like there was just a lid on IU's basket at the very end, and that was that. So you know what? I took more positives away than I should have, but obviously the metrics are not going to like the 17-point loss and the 7-0 run for Nebraska to put the game away.
Well, here's where I'm going to disagree with you a little bit because, yeah, I do agree they fought back well after that opening punch from Nebraska. I think Nebraska started out 7 for 7 from the field or something like that. And then Indiana kind of battled the whole way through. But where I see the issue is it was the same problems that we've seen throughout the past few years that cost Indiana this game. It was poor shooting, it was poor defense, it was a lack of leadership. And we've seen these same problems lose Indiana games. And you look in, I mean, especially in that 17-1 run late in the game. I mean, of course any 17-1 run is going to be bad, but it was the way that it happened because Indiana just kept shooting threes. There was no offensive identity, there was no real game plan. It was just get the ball out to the perimeter and find an open look for three, and then you're not going to be able to get back fast enough on the defensive end, and that's why Nebraska scored so easily in this game. Um, so I mean, there were good things to take away. Indiana stuck with Nebraska in a tough environment throughout most of the game, but it's just the same problems. That's why I don't consider this as good of a game as you.
Yeah, the threes is really the big thing that I marvel at. And like if I look at Nebraska stats, 30 for 49 from the field, 61%, 8 of 14 from three, 57%, and 17 of 26 from the free throw line. Yeah, I mean, if you close your eyes, you think that's Indiana's line. Like that's the way Indiana has played, the last few years. That they're about 60% from the field, between 50 and 60%. They don't take many threes. 14 was like about the average coming into Friday night's game. Sure, they're probably not going to make 8 of them, especially on the road. And then, free throws, they're always about 2 of 3. So all things considered, that's an Indiana line right there that Nebraska had, and they won the game. And Indiana's out here, 23 of 65, kind of like, teams come in and shoot cold if they come to Assembly Hall. 8 of 35, they're just chucking up threes, and then they're good enough from the free throw line, 14 of 20. They don't get to the line a whole lot. So the roles were kind of reversed here. I don't get how you take 35 threes in a true road game this early in the season when not enough guys have proven that they can consistently make it from beyond the arc. And Goody was 3 of 10. He made like two of his first three, which is big as Indiana was, coming back from that 10-point deficit. Galloway hit three threes, the only three shots he made. But I mean, 9 of his 12 shots should not be threes, considering the way he shot it last year and the larger the larger margin and the larger sample size, what I'm trying to say, that he had last year. And then Miles Rice 1 of 4. The right guys are not taking threes, and you cannot allow your team to take 35 threes in a game that was particularly very close. That really just ticks me off, and it shows that the coaching isn't there. There's no identity to this team on offense, and there were also just some bad shots taken at the beginning of the shot clock. Bryson Tucker 1 of 9. I want to say 8 of his misses were just like bad shots. And as soon as it went up, he goes, "Why the heck are you shooting that?" Even the one he made was like, "I probably shouldn't have shot that." But just 35 threes is ridiculous for a team that was averaging half those attempts coming into this game. You cannot completely change the way you go about your offense, and a team that was playing well going into the Nebraska game on the road for a team that always plays well seemingly at home in the Nebraska Cornhuskers.
You bring up a really interesting point about the rules being reversed because there's been so much talk about, oh, Indiana needs to shoot more threes, and then they go out and shoot 35 and it costs them the game. Like, and then you look at Nebraska, both of these teams made 8 threes on the day. Okay. Indiana attempted 35, Nebraska attempted 14. For one, that's just not a good look. But also, if Indiana passed up at like what, 6 of those 3s, the attempts at least, and tried to find a better look for two and utilize your 7-footer and your 6'8" all conference forward, you might have been in a little bit more shape, better shape in this game, and you might have even had a chance to win at the end of it. But when you just go down the floor and shoot 35 threes and you make the same amount as the other team, that's not going to win you a basketball game. And also, when you're missing threes, it lets teams get in transition. And Nebraska loves to play fast. They love to play in transition. It's exactly what they did. They had 36 points in the paint. Only 4 fast break points. They didn't really go all the way coast to coast, but they found open looks, catching Indiana's defense off guard in that transition look. I mean, the threes were the story of the game. I mean, that's the number you look at when you're looking at this box score that kind of pops out. You're like, did Indiana really shoot 35 threes in a game? Um, and while the volume may be nice to have, this team's just not good enough to make enough threes to make 35 attempts worth it.
Yeah, just the shot selection was really puzzling. And especially your best three-point shooter, at least the guy who everyone says in the Big Ten, this is, one of the best prolific shooters in the conference, Mackenzie Mbako, gets 2 fouls in the first 30 seconds. And oh, yeah, then let's start shooting threes when you go down by 10, which I get it. That's the way to get back in the game. And that's why we've always had to worry that, oh, Indiana goes down early, they're toast. And that just wasn't the case in this game. But I mean, if Mackenzie Mbako took 1 3 in the game. Yeah, he only played 13 minutes. He was in foul trouble the entire night. He ended up with 3 fouls. I'm worried about Mbako. He has not played well as of late. He hasn't been on the floor as of late. And it's some of Indiana's defensive issues. Albeit Nebraska hit some tough shots. Got to tip your cap to them. They made some really, really tough shots. That one of, I want to say, Bryce Williams, like falling down, hits the shot like off the bank on an offensive rebound. Was like, all right, if that's going to go in, it's not going to be our night. I can live with that. You can live with losing to Nebraska on the road, which in past years you just don't say, but that's the way I think the Big Ten is and the way Indiana basketball is just at the moment. But overall, Ibaka has not played well. Something needs to change, whether it's the starting lineup, because defensively, you're just getting beat all the time. The switches aren't there. Too many easy baskets. And, I mean, Bryce Williams, 30 points off 10 of 15 shooting. I mean, they chased a Sejan seemingly off the three-point line, only had 3 attempts. And they had 15 points off the bench. Indiana was pretty close to that margin as well. They had, or actually, it was 28 off the bench. I forgot a Sejan comes off the bench. But it's just not good enough for my. The shot selection isn't there, and Mackenzie Mbako is not on the floor. Then do not force up threes for the love of Jesus Christ.
Well, Mbako, we've seen this many times in for the past 2 years when Mackenzie Mbako gets in early foul trouble. This time it was the first 2 defensive possessions. He picked up 2 fouls and immediately he goes to the bench. Now, in this case, it's understandable. Say he picked up his second foul, with what, 11 minutes to go in the half, maybe you think about keeping him in. But Mackenzie Mbako is the guy that stretches the floor for Indiana because he's the only guy who's really proved himself to be a reliable three-point shooter. And when you lose that guy, you lose that draw out to the three-point line. They just clog everything up in the paint because they know that's where Indiana's going to go. So you look at what Indiana did in the paint today, or not today, in this game. They had, let's see, I believe it was, there it is, 24 points in the paint. And the field goal numbers, 23 of 65. So that's 35% from the field, and 35 of those attempts of the 65 are from three. So they just completely abandoned everything to do with their bigs. And Ballo had, let's see, well, Renew had 12 points and Ballo had 8. So they combined for 20. And they were relatively efficient, 3 for 6 for Renew and 3 for 4 for Ballo, 11 rebounds for Ballo, 3 for Renew. And then you just go down the efficiency numbers of the guards and the forwards. Rice was good, 8 for 13, and then you just drop off after that. Galloway 3 for 12, Tucker 1 for 9, Carlisle 1 for 7, Goody 3 for 10, and Baco 1 for 4. I mean, your bigs were shooting over 50% from the field combined. They were shooting 60% from the field, and you just plummet your shooting numbers and the quality looks that you're getting by just jacking up threes.
I thought Indiana actually in that as they were coming back in that first half, really after the 12-minute mark, I want to say they did a good job passing the ball out of doubles. Like we knew Nebraska without rank masks, obviously out for the year. That's a big loss for the Huskers. Was a big part of a reason why that team made the tournament and obviously was caught in the shadow of Keisei Tominaga. But without him, like Nebraska's going to double. And I thought Indiana did a good job. Like Ballo, like obviously he's not going to dribble the ball too much, but did a good job dribbling once to his left, finding an open man, and Indiana could swing the ball around and potentially get it back down low before Nebraska gets back in position for a good look. And then they did a better job, I think, getting Renew the ball more, seeing him get the double, and he can dribble it a few more times, which obviously moves Nebraska's defense around a little bit more and can find the open shooter, I think, which is why Indiana was taking those threes because you figured, well, if Nebraska's just going to clog the middle, then someone's got to be open from the outside, and it's essentially like you're playing against a zone just because of how much Nebraska is going to double the big man or the big men in Indiana's case. But overall, I mean, you're 15 of 30 on twos. Like, and we all know with Indiana, obviously Bryson Tucker takes mid-range. Indiana does take long twos, but I mean, if you're going 15 of 30 from inside the arc, then something is working, and you have the lowest percentage shot in college basketball, and it just didn't fall for Bryson Tucker in this game. That's a freshman playing in a true road game for the first time in his career, and just the second different building, the third, I guess, if you include Assembly Hall, that Indiana has played in this year. But you have to look at the numbers and say, hey, the big man is working, and if you can rely on Luke Goody to make 2 or 3 threes to get you back in the game, then you don't have to keep chucking up threes. Like it's not going to fall for everybody. So the fact that Indiana tried to win this game with threes in a different building is what pisses me off the most. But I mean, here we are. It's a 17-point loss, another blowout loss in the Mike Woodson era, and the defense just falls apart. I mean, you just way too many good looks. As I said, Nebraska hit some tough shots. Fine, so be it. But just the way Indiana tried to get back in this game and then try and win the game, just pathetic.
I think the worst thing about this game. Now, I'm not going to hate too much on the first half because I think Indiana actually played really well in the first half. Lost the half 44-41, but they were hanging with Nebraska. They fought back. Whatever, it's past you. You go into the second half, and it's close until um, the final, well, let's see, the final 6.5 minutes. Okay. It was a 1 point game with 6.5 minutes to go. And then Indiana goes 1 for their last 18 from the field. It's like the offense was playing great up until that point and then just stalled out. And then what did Indiana do? They just kept shooting those threes. We've talked about it already, but it's worth saying again. Within the last 6.5 minutes, they were 1 for 18 finished 0 for their last 12 and turned the ball over 3 times in the last 3 minutes of the game. And Nebraska just completely ripped them apart on both ends of the floor. In the Big Ten, you're going to be in close games more often than you would expect. And when you're in these close games, this cannot happen because the margin for error in the Big Ten, especially this year with so many good teams, is so small that you cannot afford to give up a 17-1 run and a 7-0 run in the last 2.5 minutes of the game to anybody, especially in a road game that you had a chance to win.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. The offense capitulated down the stretch. The turnovers were bad, and you cannot play any segment of Big Ten basketball in those 4 minutes, or else you're gonna go down a lot. And I just think it's another really bad loss in Power Four play. And Indiana played well enough to win this game. I think in certain situations they just couldn't hit shots, which happens in the first road game. Which I think why you should schedule road games in non-conference play. So when you actually go on the road and have to win a game in the last 5 minutes, you have at least the confidence to do it in an opposing gym. Please stop with the cupcake games, please. I know it's what the metrics want, but let's play a conference or a non-conference road game and at least help your chance at winning this game because I don't think any of us actually expected IU to win this game, even with the on paper Indiana's the better team. Whatever, first road game have never gone well for IU over the years, and this is maybe an understanding why, but the stats for Mike Woodson in these kind of games. A quarter of Indiana's Power Four games in the 4 years of Mike Woodson have been 15-point losses. One out of every 4 games you are playing against a Power Four opponent, Indiana is getting run off the floor. And in this situation, it was the last 5 minutes where Indiana did not look like a D1 team. But, I mean, his record versus Power Five schools, Mike Woodson, 44 and 43. He's 15 and 33 against Power 5 schools that end up making the NCAA tournament. And of those 33 losses, 21 of them have been by 14 or more points. That is 2 touchdowns, and this is not football. It is not good enough, and the blowouts continue to be an issue. And if the metrics and the computer stats continue to back up what they have in the last few years, then Indiana is in trouble of making the NCAA tournament. And we said this is an Indiana team that has to get to the second weekend of the tournament in order for Mike Woodson to feel good about his job. And now here we are again, and Indiana could damn near be another bubble team come the end of the year if they play like this on the road like they do in the rest of the Big Ten games.
No, I'm right with you. And it's just the you talk about the non-conference games and you go back to the exhibition, you beat Tennessee at Tennessee, who's now, I believe, the number one team in the AP poll, but that game doesn't count. And it just makes me like, it's really frustrating to see that because with that game, you saw what Indiana was capable of, and you saw how good they could be against a good team like Tennessee in a true road environment. I mean, it may have been an exhibition, but there were a lot of people in that stadium, and it looked like it felt like a regular game. But you then look at the Bahamas trip, the Nebraska game, and everything that happened in the Tennessee game just was abandoned. There's not really an identity. They didn't combine the good play of Miles Rice. I remember he had 20 points in Tennessee and then 20 points in this Nebraska game here. They didn't combine Miles Rice's good game with the rest of their offense. And I think that's so important to do because when you bring in all of these guys from around the country in different schools, they have different skill sets. And the point of them is not to be individually good, it's to be good together. And Kurt Signetti says it's not addition, it's multiplication. So Indiana has not been able to multiply or even add these players together because they've just been doing their own individual thing. Like when Umar Ballo and Malik Renew have good games, Miles Rice and the rest of the guards have not had a good game. When Miles Rice has a good game, the Indiana doesn't go down to their bigs enough. There's not enough complementary play in Indiana's offense that makes it's so predictable on any given day. Like Nebraska is a team that's going to play fast, they're going to play with their guards. So what does Indiana do? They play fast and with their guards and completely abandon the slow game with the bigs. They don't even try to slow Nebraska down. And that's what I've been talking about with these non-Big Ten teams in the ACC, the SEC, Big 12, Big East, what have you. They're going to play faster. They're going to play on the perimeter. And Indiana's got to be able to put together its pieces that it spent a lot of money for and combine them all for their own skills together because these individual performances are not going to get the job done.
Not at all. This is a good example of why money doesn't necessarily equal success. And it goes in basketball, it goes in life. And there's obviously a few teams that are underperforming right now. And Indiana is up there with the amount of the NIL money that they spent to go out and get Paolo, Rice, Carlisle, Goody, you name them, et cetera, et cetera. You can't be putting a product out like this. And once again, Indiana falls into the trap on the road of playing to the opponent's pace. You look at the Minnesota game. Indiana came out fast. Minnesota plays so slow on offense. They averaged like 20 seconds of possession. And Indiana said, screw it. We're playing fast. We're chucking the ball down the field to Ballo. We look like a football team, throwing passes from one end of the court to the other. And in this game, you're just playing fast. You're throwing up threes. You're not going deep into the shot clock, whatever. You're playing right into the opponents. You're playing right into their play style, and it's just not going to work on the road. And once again, it's coaching, and no one wants to step up and say anything until after the game we didn't do anything well enough. But these adjustments, more adjustments, need to be made in the middle of the game. I think is the bottom line here.
And well, I mean, you look at Nebraska's been a fast-paced team for the past few years, and Indiana has not been that way. And you look at the last four matchups that span the three games last year and then this year. In Lincoln, the first game last year, 86-70 Nebraska. Then in Bloomington, 85-70 Nebraska. Then in Minneapolis in the Big Ten tournament game, it's a game I want to forget and never want to think about again. 93-66 Nebraska in Minneapolis. That was a brutal watch. And then this game, 85-68. This is a fast-paced team. You look at other fast-paced teams that Indiana plays, and you're probably going to see the same result. You saw this with Gonzaga. You saw this with Louisville. Teams that shoot a lot of threes, play on the perimeter, and play fast, Indiana does not do well. And Nebraska is one of the few Big Ten teams that does this. So we still have room to see what Indiana does against these slower-paced Big Ten teams. Saw it against Minnesota. Likely see it coming up soon. But, of course, we got two more non-conference games against group of five teams before that. It's the same thing every year. It's a Mike Woodson coach team that plays into the pace of the opponent, whether that is fast or slow. If it's slow, they're probably going to have a good chance to win. If it's a fast-paced team, they're probably not going to have a good chance to win.
Yeah, and I think with IU just against fast teams and with, let's be honest here, with the starting five that Indiana has, and we know Woodson never changes this. Renew is a liability defensively. You look at his stats, 4 fouls in 20 minutes. That's eight fouls in a 40-minute span. That's not good enough. And he's a junior now, and it's at this point where it's like, you are what the stats say you are. It's your junior year. This was the issue of his freshman year, especially when conference play hit. He kind of hit the freshman wall, is what we kind of said, especially on the defensive end. And last year, there would be times where he couldn't stay on the floor because he'd have like 2 fouls in 2 minutes or something like that. And with him and Ibaka, who has been a liability defensively this year, you just cannot have guys on the floor that are just defensively not going to do it in Mike Woodson's style, which is defense comes first more than anything else. So I know IU's hurt, we'll talk about that, but adding another injury to the fold doesn't help. But something needs to change, I think, with the starting lineup. I cannot if I'm coaching, I just do not want Renew and Mbako on the floor both to start the game if one or both of them is a risk to get in foul trouble and to basically be relegated to the bench for 10 to 15 minutes of the first half. And for Mbako, he was on the bench for what, 19 and a half minutes of the first half, essentially? What was it, 2,030 minutes? And he was done. So you just cannot have that. And I think something really needs to change. And I look someone like Luke Goody, who's had decent plus minus numbers this entire year. I know that's, a stat that doesn't give off everything, or even, Carlisle, I think, with his defense. Give him a chance. Look, he's someone who can knock down shots. He was plus 10 in this game. Give someone like Carlisle maybe an extra chance. And I don't know, a three guard set. change it up or something. Or yeah, but I think something needs to change with the starting lineup. And you just need more defense out there to start the game because 13-3 with this IU team, you are not winning that game. Like out of 100 times Indiana's down 13-3 on the road to any Big Ten team, I'm giving them like a 5% chance to win the game. And this was I think more than a 5% chance the way IU played. They could have won this game, and definitely more of a 5% chance that the way they played after the first 2 minutes. But you just can't be putting yourself in these big deficits if you're not going to shoot the three successfully.
Yep, you look back to Minnesota as well. And that game, while Indiana was making shots, they were also giving up a lot of shots at the beginning of the game. I think all the way until the under four timeout, or the under 16 timeout, I should say. It was just shot after shot after shot. And Indiana was able to speed up the pace and get out of Minnesota's pace of play and win that game. They didn't do that too much in this one here against Nebraska. Um, Starting lineup wise, I'm with you on the Carlisle front. I think Caden Carlisle is the best point of attack defender that Indiana has on the roster. And point of attack killed Indiana in this game. I mean, Nebraska players were blowing by Indiana players all the way to the paint, kick out, swing it, or just lay it up, whatever it was open. And, it's tough to take guys out of the starting lineup that have so much offensive potential, but if there's any guy I would take out right now, it would be Mbako just because of his slow offensive start. I wouldn't mind a three-guard set of Rice, Carlisle, and Galloway with Ballo and Renew in there. That may be something they look at trying, maybe not in the starting lineup, but as they cycle through the bench in one of these two tune-up games coming up. But there's got to be a change in some way, whether that's strategic, whether that's lineup, whether that's, somebody stepping up and being a leader and making a change. But what Indiana's got going right now is not necessarily what you want to be seeing at this point of the season.
And people are going to say we're overreacting to one game, whatever, but there are just too many situations where Indiana gets down and it's like on the road, you're just not coming back and winning these games. And it's always at one point where there's this big run that just puts Indiana away. And in past years against Nebraska, like I think Indiana was down like close to double digits at the end of the first half. Last year in Lincoln, that was early January. That was another game early on in the season where Indiana maybe was the better team, but you just don't give IU a good shot to win that kind of game. And the IU lost, but there was a big run, I think, at the end of the first half last year. In that second game at Assembly Hall last year, like Indiana was down big at half. They had a huge run. They took the lead in the second half, and then Nebraska just completely, like you're playing tug of war, grabbed the rope and just pulled it all the way back. And that lead that they have at halftime was the lead they had at the end of the game after all the work IU did. And then last year, God, in Minneapolis, we don't even have to talk about that. The stats speak for themselves. But there's just always one run that kills IU. And I guess fortunately it happened early in the game to where IU had chances late and more time to come back in this game. But 17-1 run. I mean, God, it's always something like that on the road that just really just puts IU in the cellar and just sucks them all the way to the end, and they have no chance of winning.
I can't tell you the last time I felt confident that Indiana would win a road game. I, especially in the Big Ten, I really don't know. Um, that obviously changes as the game goes on, and there have been some games where I've been pleasantly surprised, but as of right now, I am not thinking too highly of this Indiana team on the road. Um, I mean, they're going to get a good amount of home wins. Everybody in the Big Ten is going to get a good amount of home wins. And I do think that the Big Ten is just going to beat up on itself throughout the whole game and or the whole season, and everybody's going to have 7+ wins. That's my prediction. Um, but you got to win on the road. That's where you separate yourself. Mike Woodson says, "Hey, we want to win the Big Ten. We want to go to the tournament. We want to win a national championship." If you only win at home, that's not possible. So that's a step that Indiana needs to take in playing better on the road in order to make those goals an accomplishment. Because he said, if we don't win the Big Ten championship this year, it's a failure. So got to step it up to get to that point. because then Mike Woodson himself would be saying that the season is a failure. But we'll switch our focus from the road games to the next couple home games. And these are going to be important tune-up games for Indiana because these are the last two non-conference group of five teams Indiana will see for the rest of the year until potentially March. So on Saturday, um, the day after the college football playoff game in Notre Dame, that will be Chattanooga, who is no stranger to Indiana. Of course, you think back to the 2016 tournament, and Indiana faced Chattanooga there. Um, the Mocs not having a terrible year, to say the least. Had a couple big wins, played some Power Four teams close, lost by 12 at St. Mary's. Um, let's see. Evansville is probably their best win right now at Evansville, but again, you never count these non-conference teams out, these bye games out, um, because you just never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you can never take these games for granted, and with the way IU at times plays, it's like, well, one team can always nip you right in the butt, and this Chattanooga team is definitely a team that could do that. I mean, they're shooting 44% from the field, 31% from three, and 77% from the line. They're not all that good, but like it's just one game for a team that has one game so far this year. Confidence does a lot coming into Assembly Hall. IU obviously this is IU's first game in over a week. Obviously, it's finals week as we're recording this, so. There's always that in mind, and IU. I don't remember the post final. Well, I mean, 2 years ago in or last year was Kansas. It was the game after finals, and Indiana came out strong. Obviously, very well could have won that. So in years past, I think they've actually been fine with these long with this kind of week long break. But there's always one team that always gives IU a fit, and well, the other it was UNC Greensboro, which ironically enough had like the same colors, where they gave IU a fight. I mean, that was a game with at the last media timeout, but obviously IU pulled away and won comfortably to the point where you kind of can push aside all the negatives that there were from that game. But Chattanooga can do it. They've been in the tournament. They played Illinois close a few years ago. In that game, they very well could have won that. So you can't take these games for granted. And yeah, you got to win these two by 15 points to going back to the computer rankings where Indiana obviously had a big drop off. Although South Carolina did do IU a favor and beat Clemson the other day, which did help the metrics. And that's kind of where we are right now. It's like, can other teams help us out? Because Indiana can't help themselves out.
Yeah, a quick look at the metrics right now. The net Indiana is 66. That's the lowest of all the rankings right now. Ken Palm 51, the Bart Torvik 43, and the Evan Miyakawa 42. So you can kind of put together a general idea of where Indiana's at right now, and where I would put them at is a bubble team.
Yeah.
Right on the border. Um, they have gotten a little bit of help from some teams, but Providence has not done too well this season. So that win is not helped them out too much. But there is a common opponent in Indiana's second non-conference game this next week in Winthrop. Winthrop played at Louisville and only lost by 15, 76-61. Now, Winthrop is always a perennial tournament contender. They have won their conference more often than not in recent years, and they're going to be coming off a loss to Florida State here, 82-64, and then a game versus Mercer on Saturday, the 21st, the same day Indiana plays Chattanooga. And then they'll have a nice 8-day break coming to Bloomington then the next Sunday of December 29th for a 4 p.m. game at Assembly Hall. So I think if there's a game out of these two that gives Indiana trouble, it's going to be more of Winthrop than Chattanooga.
Yeah, that's probably true. It's like these are the games where it's like, yeah, who's even? It's this time of the year where it's like, yeah, who does this team Indiana plays? I mean, obviously this upcoming game against Chattanooga is the night after the biggest game in IU football history, the playoff game. So the crowd will be something. If there'll be anybody there, the students will all be gone, obviously. And who knows of the traveling contingent that goes to South Bend? I mean, either be kind of just a funeral, everyone's trying to get over the loss, or it's just like an after party at the basketball game. But you just gotta Indiana's got to use maybe that lack of energy to get in these games, and they played close against Kansas last year over break, so I guess that's the only reason where it gives you some confidence that they'll come out and play well. But as I said, there's always just that one stretch where teams are allowed to get back into games. Usually, it's kind of been right before halftime this year, but you have to play for a full 40 minutes, and you got to win both of these games by 15 plus. It's what we've said all year. I mean, nothing changes in these two games.
I'm going to make a little change. I'm going to say
Okay.
20 plus.
Okay.
Just based off recent performance, I mean, these are two bye games. You should be winning them by 20 plus, although they are decent group of five teams. But the way Indiana's been playing, I think the more they win by, the more it'll help. 20 points is my mark. I think it's possible more for Chattanooga than Winthrop. I do think it's possible for both. Um, but 15 would be a bare minimum for me. Um, and about the crowd for the Chattanooga game, it's if I had to guess how many people were there, I would probably give you under 5,000. Because not only is it the day after the Indiana, the biggest game in Indiana football history, it's during the slate of the next three college football playoff first round games. And, it's noon on a Saturday. Students will not be the same as what Kansas was last year, which was special. Um, so the lack of energy there is kind of a trap in my book for Indiana to not play with enough energy, kind of give up some effort in that Chattanooga game. So that'll be a thing to keep an eye on. Um, and then again, no students for Winthrop. That crowd will probably be a little bit better, but the crowds in general have just been really disappointing um, this year. I mean, there's still obviously the football buzz and everybody's kind of in football mode, but and this is Indiana basketball. It's Assembly Hall. You gotta show out. But um, at any rate, we'll touch on one more thing before we wrap it up, and that is guard depth. We've talked about Indiana having guard depth, and now that has kind of thinned out a little bit because Gabe Cupps recently underwent a procedure. He'll be out for the year, and then just got the notifications today that Ja'Kai Newton underwent another procedure on him that is unrelated to the one last year, and he'll be out indefinitely, but expected to return later in the season.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
you feel bad for Ja'Kai. Just first thing that comes to mind, and like just for a guy who did all the work to get back and now already banged up and gonna miss next month and a half. Hopefully, get him back by February. But just the first thing is like, man, you just feel bad for the kid.
he's had some moments in the end of some of these games where Indiana's up and he just goes in. He's looked really good. He's been exciting to watch. He's shifty. He can, make some pull-up jump shots and he's crafty around the rim. And that's just that athleticism that Indiana has been missing for the past few seasons. And of course, he missed all of his freshman season, and then he'll be missing a big portion of his sophomore season. So you'll probably be seeing a lot more of Anthony Leal. You'll be seeing more minutes from Kane Carlisle. Luke Goody will be seeing a bigger role. Because the guards have thinned out when you lose two of them. That makes it really difficult.
It does. And we've talked about how the bench is kind of like three guys, and one of them usually has a pretty good game between Goody, Carlisle, and Tucker. And obviously, that was not the case on Friday against Nebraska, but now you're so much more thinned out. Obviously, no Gabe Cupps. Leal has really not played him at all this year, considering how good he was in some of the games last year. It's a little bit of a surprise, considering I think defensively he's definitely ahead of the curve. But just something's got to change, and obviously Indiana's going to have to futz with the lineups. You mentioned when I kind of played this little game with you, this is what the least confident you've been in an IU road game since the Nebraska game. I think back to the Purdue game last year, that road game. It's like, all right, like I give Indiana less than 1% chance. I'm going to quickly run through the rest of the road games that Indiana has, all in Big Ten play, and I don't know how many we're going to get to, but just any game we feel actually confident in IU winning. Let's go through them. All right,
Okay,
quickly. At Penn State, the Palestra. No,
not a
number
chance.
one. At Iowa, January 11th.
No.
Indiana does not play well there. 0 for 2. Okay, great. This might be fun. Ohio State on January 17th.
That would be a possibility, yes.
That's one. Jake Diebler's team has looked a little odd this year. They've gotten blown out. So there's one. Okay. I figured we get at least one. At Northwestern the following Wednesday.
That arena's cursed when Indiana goes in there.
Exactly. Northwestern's like Nebraska. They always play well at home. All right, 1 for 4. At Purdue.
No.
Okay, 1 for 5. At Wisconsin the next Tuesday, start of February.
No.
Okay, same here. At Michigan State, February 11th.
No.
One for, well, I don't know what we're at now. Okay, and there's two left. At Washington.
Yes.
Me too. There's two. At Oregon. No.
No.
That is two games that Indiana has. They played 20 of them in played 10 road games, now 9. 2 out of 9 that we actually feel Indiana has a chance to win. That's where we are right now. It's
It's
ridiculous.
it's
It's
you know,
early. I get it. But it's still ridiculous. And I wanted to play that game because I figured the number would be 2.
no, I'm glad you did that because that was a good look at where our thoughts are as as fans at the moment. But it's just a concern, but it's not that it's this year that makes that unique. It's because if you went through that and did that every year before the season started, I don't think I would get higher than two on my answers. Maybe three. Probably three is my limit. And that's, I mean, yes, of course, it's college basketball and it's some of the best atmospheres you'll get in any sport in the country, but you have to be able to win on the road if you want to be a contending team, not only for a conference championship, but for postseason hopes nationally as well. And if you're confident, I mean, our opinion means nothing. Let's just put that out there. But if if I'm confident and you're confident that two games on the road Indiana can win, I just it's not making you feel good about Indiana being a contending team in the conference and nationally.
Yeah, and it's like we've always said, in order to make the tournament and to give yourselves the best shot, you got to win more true road games than you do lose home games. And obviously, there's a lot less true road games out there because IU hosts so much in the non-conference. And here we are. If Indiana wins 2 road games this year, that would be like the most embarrassing thing ever. And sure, you can count maybe a half for beating Providence, but Providence stinks. And I mean, Indiana's probably going to lose more than 2 games at home, somewhere around there. You have to think. I know the home schedule is not that bad. We don't have to go through the home games, but I mean, it's like you're bound to lose a couple. It happens every year. So, I mean, the fact that we might be sitting here and Indiana has more home losses than road wins is telling of where the program is at the moment.
I mean, again, it's still relatively early, and our thoughts and opinions on what Indiana will do on the road are not exactly what's going to happen. Indiana could go 2-9 the rest of the way on the road, but it's not necessarily um, a definite result there. But I mean, yeah, just final thoughts before we wrap it up, Austin. Where Indiana stands right now, what your reaction is, and where you stand on your thoughts.
The numbers I think of with Mike Woodson in against Power Five teams and our Power Four teams, I guess now is what we're calling them. I Power Five include the Big East. They're worth obviously that mention. Regardless, the numbers are pathetic. I mean, 25% of those games are blowout losses. That is incredible. And Indiana usually wins right around 50% of them. So that means half of your losses are blowouts, which is not good enough. Never been good enough. And that cannot happen. And that just says where the program is. That shows the lack of urgency there is, and especially in these road games. This is the time for Indiana to prove themselves to the committee because they did not do that in the Bahamas. The computer metrics are all there. Joe Lunardi's got Indiana first 4 out. It's too early to look at that. I get it, but if that's where Indiana truly is, then there has to be a lot more urgency of these guys. What the heck are they doing in practice? Is a question I ask when I watch this team twice a week for 40 minutes. So a ton of questions, and there's just no urgency in this program. And unfortunately, that's just the way it is with Mike Woodson.
That's a real optimistic look there.
Yeah, didn't I say I was going to be optimistic this
Yeah.
episode? Yeah, maybe for the first 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I still have some hope. I do think that there's time to fix it, but there is concern because it's the same as I've said. many times. It's the same thing happening over and over again. It's the same issues, and it frankly isn't winning basketball because a good team would find a way to win that game against Nebraska and not go on the lower end of a 17-1 run, finishing 1 for 18 from the field in that game. So this Nebraska game is behind us. We don't really have to think about it too much ever again. We'll look forward. Indiana's playing Chattanooga on December 21st, and they'll be playing Winthrop on December 29th. A little kind of break in the schedule where they've got two games, a lot of time in between, figure things out, tune themselves up, and hopefully find an offensive identity and put it together on the defensive end. So that'll wrap it up for this one. For Austin, I'm Ian. Thanks for listening to the House of Hoosier podcast.